Hello everyone, today we're looking at B18.7 maintaining biodiversity. So by the end of this lesson you need to be able to explain how waste, deforestation and global warming impact on biodiversity, and you need to be able to link some human activities to their impact on the maintenance of biodiversity. Your quick task is to think about what are the two main greenhouse gases and where they come from, so think back to previous lessons on that one. So write down the title, date and objectives, complete the quick task whilst you press pause, and when you're ready, press play to move on. Here are your answers to the quick task. So the two main greenhouse gases that you need to know about are carbon dioxide and methane. Carbon dioxide is released when organisms respire, from burning fossil fuels, from burning peat, and from slash and burn deforestation. Methane is released when rubbish and landfill rots. It's also released from cows burping and farting, and from rice paddy fields. So for your starter, I want you to think about how many different species do you think live on a single oak tree? So guess a number, how many different types of organisms are living on the oak tree? I want you to think about whether an oak tree is biodiverse or not. And if you do or don't think it's biodiverse, why? Why do you think that? So the answer actually surprised me as well. There could be up to 1,000 different species living on a single oak tree, and probably initially you might have thought about an oak tree, you might have thought of birds or squirrels living in there, but actually you need to go right down to the micro level. So think about all the different species of bacteria and fungi that would live on that tree, maybe in the bark and so forth. Other small plants would grow on the oak tree in cracks and crevices. So on this oak tree, you can see here, there appears to be some kind of ivy perhaps growing on it, or maybe that's a moss. There would also be lichens growing on the tree. You'd also find hundreds and hundreds of different insects and mini beasts, caterpillars, beetles, bugs, all sorts of different things. When they flower in the summertime, maybe bees and butterflies would rely on those for food. And lastly, of course, the bigger animals that we'll probably think about initially, like birds and squirrels living on the tree, in the branches and so forth. And also when you think about the roots, here sometimes where the bigger roots are near the tree, you might get burrowing animals living under there, such as rabbits or rodents. Okay, so I have emailed out to you this slide as a blank. Now you can either print it out on A4 or on A3, or you can type into it as a Word document or as a PowerPoint document. And your other option, if you really can't type into it or you can't print it out, just maybe open a double page in your books, draw these shapes, and then you'll be able to fill in the poster activity as we go through the lesson. So this is what we're doing today. It's a poster task lesson. I want you to listen to each section of the video, pause it, and read the relevant paragraph in your book. Research that section on the internet as well if you choose to, and then fill in the relevant section of your poster, and I'll tell you what to put in each section of your poster. So the first thing we're going to look at is breeding programs. So many species are going extinct, they're dying out in the wild. Their loss would mean a loss of biodiversity. So breeding programs and seed banks try to keep these organisms from dying out. So we've got two pictures here. On the left we have this panda. This is one of the pandas at Edinburgh Zoo, and there are many panda breeding programs. Pandas are naturally solitary organisms. They like living on their own. They tend not to mate very frequently, maybe every few years. And when they do reproduce, it's not like dogs or rabbits where they produce a whole litter of offspring. They only have one baby at a time. And if they have twins, they actually end up usually rejecting one of the twins and just raising one organism, one offspring. So for those reasons, pandas are very susceptible to extinction and habitat loss and so forth. So if we breed pandas and keep their species going, that's going to be good for the environment they live in because there's going to be more biodiversity. And this image here, again, many of you might remember your field trip to Wakehurst, Kew Gardens at Wakehurst, and there's a Millennium seed bank there, and the scientists are collecting all the seeds from relevant plants. They have a selection criteria to make sure that if they do go extinct in the wild, that plant still exists. And on the next slide, there's an extract from their website. So this is taken from the Millennium Seed Bank, MSB, Millennium Seed Bank website. So Millennium Seed Bank scientists work with partners in more than 95 countries around the world. Where possible, collections of seeds stored at Wakehurst are duplicated in seed banks in the country they're collected from. So these are the three categories here that they're focusing on. So from alpine, dryland, coastal and island ecosystems, which are the most vulnerable to climate change. So if global warming happens, these organisms in the wild are going to die out, and that's going to affect all the other biodiversity in that area. So we want to try and keep those plants alive. From arid conditions, so these organisms are easier to store. So arid means hot and dry. So when these plants are dried out, they can stay in a frozen state for many, many years. So they're more likely that the seeds won't die in that storage period. And lastly, plants that are endemic to their location or not found anywhere else. Or plants that are economically important, so they're important in terms of the economy for that area and the finance, or they're endangered. So again, all of these plants are vulnerable to climate change, and if they die out, they're going to affect all the other organisms in that area. So the first thing on your poster is to fill in the top left section. I'd like you to explain some ways in which humans use breeding programs and seed banks to maintain biodiversity. To add to the information I've already given you, you could look at page 298 in your biology books on Caboodle, and you could also carry out some internet research. So pause the video here, fill in that section, take about 5 minutes to do it, and then press play when you're ready. So the next thing we're going to look at today is the protection of rare habitats, and just for this part of the information on the video we're going to be looking at Heathland Conservation. So I've got some images of British organisms here, including a grouse, a nightjar, and I think that's a roe deer. These are all animals that need to live on heathland. Now heathland is shown here at the bottom. It's obviously very beautiful, lots of heather and lots of open space. And it's not like a dense forest. It's obviously like low cropped, open space where these animals can get the things that they need, including their food, the space that they need, the areas where they need to reproduce, the roaming areas. So deer, for example, they roam around through the year, and at different times of year they live in different places. Grouse, for example, are land-dwelling birds. They need to make their nests in the ground, and they need all this heather here to hide their nests. If they're nesting here on the ground, they need that coverage. So there's lots of different reasons why different organisms need heathland in order to survive. So how is heathland conserved? Well, if we don't conserve heathland, what will happen is surrounding forest will encroach on that land and bigger plants will grow that will block out the heather, and eventually you'll get like a forest there. So firstly, one of the things that farmers do is they graze small numbers of animals on the common land. They clear scrub and clear bracken. So when those small plants start to grow onto the fields or the heathland, they start the people who are conserving the land come and chop them down or clear them. Heather mowing is important too. So in historically speaking, people used to use heather and cut it down and use it for thatching roofs and other reasons for whatever they needed to make it. Nowadays we don't use heather in that way, but conservationists will come and cut that heather down. And lastly, I know this looks a bit weird. Why would we be burning things? That's going to add to carbon. But actually, if you very carefully control small amounts of burning, that clears the ground and adds nutrients back to the soil. And that's done by park rangers, and it's very, very carefully monitored and carefully controlled. And they don't do more than 1 hectare a day. So I've talked about heathland, but there are other rare habitats that you might want to look at, such as coral reefs or rainforests. So for the next section of your poster, I want you to describe how humans protect and maintain rare habitats, giving different examples. So don't use the heathland example, try and find something else. And again, if you want some support with that, you could look at page 298 and do some internet research. So pause the video, fill this section of your poster in, and press play when you're ready. Okay, looking at these two pictures, on the left you've got one version of farmland and how the land has been divided up into the different fields owned by the different farmers, or which fields they want for which thing to grow in. And on the left, you've got another version of land division that's going to be used for agriculture. So looking at the one on the left, looking at the one on the right, which do you think is more biodiverse and why? Just think about it for a few seconds. You don't need to pause the video. I'm sure this one was a very obvious answer, is that this version here of how to divide up the land is going to be a lot more biodiverse. You can see there's lots of hedges and trees and bushes and things all surrounding here. Whereas now this area of farmland on the left, we can see it's got dry stone walls. And that's all there is. There's nothing else actually to divide up. So there's not many different organisms that can live in dry stone walls. Maybe some insects and some mosses and some lichens, but that's going to be it. So obviously having hedgerows, these lines of hedges used to divide up the land, are going to be much better for biodiversity. And it's important to bear in mind this here. 70% of landscape in the UK is farmland. So previously, this would have been, again, heathland or more likely forest land, which would have been very biodiverse and very rich in life. But now we're using these areas to grow our food. So we need to bear in mind that actually we've removed these habitats and taken away these living spaces for wildlife so that we can grow food. So it's probably a really good thing to grow hedgerows. So I've shown you this image in a previous lesson, and what we've got here is a field of oilseed rape, which is where you get vegetable oil from. This section here, is a margin, and here you can see the hedgerow. And just by the farmer sacrificing this border here, by sacrificing this amount of land and by planting hedgerows instead of having stone walls or fences, it really increases the biodiversity in the countryside. So the sort of animals and organisms that live in hedgerows, you've got things like hedgehogs, of course, dormice, other small mammals, things like rabbits, squirrels, whatever else. Birds and so forth, sparrows and things would like to build their nests in here deep inside the hedge. Birds, butterflies, beetles and other insects and mini beasts. So again, all these smaller insects that would help in the biodiversity of the area because they provide the food source for the other living things. So for example, other mini beasts might include snails. Well, hedgehogs eat snails. So it increases the biodiversity of that area and the sort of the food chains and the food sources for all the different organisms. So they've got living space and they've got food sources. Okay, at the bottom of your poster, there's that long rectangle. What I'd like you to do is explain how the reintroduction of hedgerows and field margins affects biodiversity. And again, your information for that is on page 298, and you could also use some internet research. So pause the video and fill that bottom box in. The next thing we're looking at is the reduction of CO2 emissions and the reduction of deforestation. So on this graph here in the corner, you can see that UK greenhouse gas emissions have dropped. We looked at from 1997 all the way up to 2017. And if you look at this red line here, you can see it's clearly going down. That's because we are making a good effort to reduce our carbon emissions. We could be doing better, but it's better than nothing, I guess. So how are we doing this? Well, first of all, new cars that are being manufactured are much more efficient and they have to have certain fuel efficiency ratings before they're allowed out on the road. And also there's been a massive increase in electric and hybrid cars, which are much better and they produce much less emissions. We also use different sources of electricity, so there's a lot more wind farms and nuclear power nowadays, whereas previously we would have been using a lot more coal. And also many governments preventing rainforest destruction. So that's in different regions of the world. Obviously it doesn't apply to the UK, but the rate at which the rainforests are being chopped down and destroyed is being slowed. I'm not going to give you much more information on that because it means that you've got some research to do for the next part of your poster. What I'd like you to do is explain what the Kyoto Agreement is, give examples of how we are trying to reduce our carbon emissions and reduce deforestation. And again, the information for that is on page 299, and again, you can do some of your own research too. Lastly, I'd like to pause the video and maybe write some bullet points down or talk with someone if you're watching this video with someone else. What do you recycle at home? What do you think big businesses and factories need to recycle? And how can we prevent businesses just throwing their waste in landfill? How can we encourage them to recycle? Pause the video, have a think about it, or write some bullet points, or have a chat about it if you're watching this video with someone, and then press play when you're ready to move on. Okay, so as again we've discussed in previous videos, we all nowadays have plastic, paper, glass and metal collections from our homes. Also, if you go to supermarkets or other areas where, there might be a car park or something, you tend to get those big recycling bins where you can take any excess recycling. Also nowadays, most councils compost waste food. So you've got your waste food bin and any scraps and potato peelings and tea bags and so forth can go in there and they get composted instead of being thrown into landfill. However, more pressure needs to be put on businesses. You see, the thing is, we, for example, consume a lot of bottled water. And actually, if the companies who are making bottled water didn't make it in the first place or reduce their manufacturing, it wouldn't be so much of an issue. So I've put these two pictures in here. So if you go to Yo Sushi, what they do bottled water, but I don't think they sell much of it because at each table you've got these little taps of filtered water. So, if restaurants and pubs and places like that were more open with offering tap water, then that might help to reduce the amount of bottled water we're using. And also, we can all use our own reusable water bottles instead of buying water bottles. So here's an example of some of those metal water bottles that are popular at the moment. But again, if it's down to the individuals to do that, and not everyone is as conscious of the environment as I'm sure you guys are, and they just buy bottled water or buy bottled drinks and throw it straight away. So I think if more pressure was put on businesses, that would be a good thing. Also, some countries and some governments tax their businesses for throwing things in landfill. So by putting that incentive there, that if you don't recycle, we're going to charge you for throwing your rubbish on a landfill site, and obviously that's going to encourage businesses to recycle more because it's going to save them money. Okay, so last but not least, you've got your final box. You need to fill in some of the ways in which individuals, big businesses and governments can stop waste going to landfill. And again, you can use page 299 along with your own research. So pause the video and finish off your poster now. As always, I'd like to self-assess yourself against the objectives. So can you explain how waste, deforestation and global warming impact on biodiversity? Smiley, middle or sad face, depending on your confidence level. And can you link some human activities to their impact on the maintenance of biodiversity? Again, draw your little face next to that objective to show whether you are confident with that or not. And again, as always, look at your further study areas, things that you're not so sure about, and here are those resources that are always useful for you. Primrose Kitten or free science lesson videos available on YouTube, your AQA biology book, page 298 and 299 for this lesson, BBC Bite Size, or some of your other learning websites like Seneca Learning or GCSE Pod. Thanks for your hard work today, everyone, and next lesson is coming up shortly.